The Galactic Council had long feared humanity. In the grand halls of their sprawling capital, they spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the unpredictable savagery of the species from Sol. Every species in the Council had its own strengths. Some were brilliant tacticians, others masters of energy manipulation or genetic refinement, but none embodied the reckless, relentless drive of humankind. For decades, the Council had watched, waiting for an excuse to act. Humanity's expansion into the outer systems provided just that. Colonies sprang up on barren moons and inhospitable worlds, terraformed through sheer stubbornness. Where other species would have faltered, humans adapted. They didn't just survive, they thrived. That was the danger. The Council's decision was unanimous. The humans would be dealt with before they became unstoppable. The Vrelkan hunters were deployed, an elite force of silent killers, bred in darkness, honed through centuries of war. The Vrelkan knew neither fear nor hesitation. Their kind had been engineered to be the Council's blade, a species with no culture beyond efficiency, no morality beyond extermination. They had wiped out insurrections before. Humanity would be no different. The first strike came without warning. On Mars, humanity's military research outpost, comm channels flickered with static before going dark. Security footage, retrieved hours later, showed only flickers of movement, shadows twisting through the base, silent and precise. Soldiers fell before they could even scream. In less than 15 minutes, the outpost was silent. The Council watched the footage and congratulated themselves. It was beginning. 3 days later, the first anomaly was reported. A Vrelkan squad dispatched to Titan failed to report back. Surveillance drones, deployed to investigate, found only the remains of the attackers. Their bodies were twisted, shattered. The footage recovered was worse. One of the Vrelkan, its cloaking failing, its body broken, had tried to retreat. It had whispered something in its dying breath, something no Vrelkan had ever spoken before. "They are hunting us." The Council dismissed it as a malfunction, an error in Vrelkan judgment. But then it happened again, and again. The humans had responded. It wasn't with the desperation the Council had expected. It wasn't with chaotic, disorganized retaliation. Instead, they unleashed something they had kept hidden even from their own people. Project Aegis *. The Aegis operatives were not just soldiers. They were war-given form, genetically enhanced, cybernetically augmented, and trained from childhood. They were the culmination of every lesson humanity had learned about combat. Faster than any known species, stronger than nature should have allowed, and most terrifyingly, unpredictable. When the first Aegis team engaged a Vrelkan strike force on Ganymede, the battle lasted precisely 4 minutes and 16 seconds. It ended with every Vrelkan dead. Commander Juno, the leader of the Aegis division, stood among the bodies, her armor slick with the black ichor of her fallen enemies. She moved with the calm precision of someone who had seen worse and expected worse still. Her squad stood behind her, scanning the darkness for more movement. "Did they even fight back?" asked Ramirez, her second-in-command, his voice laced with disappointment. "They tried," Juno replied, her eyes narrowing as she studied the remains of the enemy. It wasn't enough. The Vrelkan had been designed to be the galaxy's perfect assassins. Cold, methodical, lethal. But they had a flaw, one the Council had never considered. They had never feared before. Fear was a foreign concept to them. Until now, one of the bodies shifted slightly. A Vrelkan, barely alive, its carapace cracked, reached weakly for a blade at its side. Juno was faster. She knelt, pressing a combat knife against the alien's throat. The Vrelkan's single remaining eye flicked to her. It spoke in halting, rasping breaths. "You are not normal humans." "No," Juno agreed. "We're not." The blade flashed, and the Vrelkan went still. Elsewhere, in the highest chambers of the Galactic Council, the panic had begun. Their perfect killers were dying. The unthinkable had happened. The predators had become prey. The Vrelkan were built for silent, efficient strikes, but against the Aegis operatives, they were outmatched in ways the Council couldn't understand. The reports were no longer just troubling. They were terrifying. A surveillance drone from a failed operation on Europa had captured something chilling. An Aegis operative standing amidst the remains of an entire squad of Vrelkan. The operative turned, looked directly into the drone's sensor array, and smirked before raising a single finger to her lips in a mocking command. Show. Then the feed cut to black. The Council could no longer deny the truth. Humanity had seen their extermination order not as a death sentence, but as a challenge. And they had answered with something far worse than anyone had imagined. The Vrelkan had been a surgical weapon, a scalpel in the hands of the Council. The Aegis operatives were not scalpels. They were war incarnate. The war had begun, but it was no longer the one the Council had planned. It was no longer about extermination. It was about survival. The silence before a battle was always the same. A hollow stillness, a breath held too long, the weight of impending violence pressing against the mind. Commander Juno had felt it 100 times before, but never like this. She stood at the edge of the ruined colony on Eridani IV, her enhanced vision scanning the scorched landscape. The Vrelkan had landed here days ago, expecting easy prey. What they found instead was them. Aegis operatives moved through the shadows like wraiths, their movements synchronized but not uniform, each adapting instinctively, unpredictably. That was what the Council would never understand. The Vrelkan were perfect killers, but they were programmed for efficiency. The Aegis operatives were designed for victory. Juno's visor displayed the enemy positions, clusters of heat signatures moving through the crumbling city, unaware they were already being hunted. She activated her comm. Phase 1. Disrupt and divide. Ramirez was the first to move. He dropped from a ruined balcony, landing soundlessly behind a patrol of 3 Vrelkan. Before they could react, his blade sliced through their necks in a single fluid motion. No screams, no wasted movement. The bodies crumpled, unnoticed by the others. Across the city, similar scenes played out. The Vrelkan were disciplined, but discipline meant predictability. The Aegis operatives exploited it without mercy. Within minutes, their numbers had thinned. Juno could feel the shift in the enemy's movements. The Vrelkan, always so precise, so confident, were faltering. Their patrols became erratic. Their cohesion splintered. They were hesitating. That was all the proof she needed. The Vrelkan, for the first time in their history, were afraid. She gave the next order. Phase 2. Strike. The night exploded with violence. Gunfire and blades tore through the remaining squads. The Vrelkan, designed to operate in absolute control, now found themselves in chaos. Some fought desperately, but their attacks were sloppy, their reactions a fraction too slow. Others tried to retreat, only to be cut down before they could vanish into the darkness. Juno moved through the carnage like a phantom, her rifle spitting controlled bursts of plasma fire. A Vrelkan leapt from the rubble, its twin daggers flashing in the dim light. She sidestepped, caught its wrist, and drove her own blade through its chest in a single brutal motion. As the creature fell, she leaned close, whispering so only it could hear. You were supposed to be the perfect hunters. The light in its eyes dimmed. When the last Vrelkan fell, the city was silent once more. No cheers, no celebration. Just the quiet efficiency of warriors securing the battlefield. Ramirez wiped his blade clean and exhaled. They're getting sloppier. They're getting desperate, Juno corrected. She turned her gaze toward the sky, where the faint glimmer of stars hinted at something larger. The Galactic Council would not ignore this. They had sent their best, and their best had failed. They wouldn't stop now. Her comm pinged. An incoming transmission from Admiral Veers, the highest-ranking officer overseeing Project Aegis. His voice was calm, measured, but she could hear the weight behind it. The Council knows, he said. They're assembling a fleet. Juno felt the shift. The mission had changed. This was no longer a war of assassins and hunters. It was about to become something far greater. It was about to become a reckoning. She switched comm channels to the entire Aegis division, her voice steady. They're coming. Let's make sure they regret it. Across the stars, the Galactic Council watched with growing horror. Their greatest killers had been undone. The Vrelkan were a broken force, their numbers dwindling, their once unstoppable presence reduced to whispers of failure. The council members convened in their high chamber, their voices filled with unease. They cannot be allowed to continue. We underestimated them. We should have never. The Grand Arbiter silenced them with a single, measured breath. What are our options? A silence settled over the chamber. None of them wanted to speak the next words. Finally, a voice. Cold. Resigned. We must commit fully. Deploy everything we have. The Grand Arbiter nodded, though a shadow passed over his expression. And if that fails? Another pause. Then we pray. But prayers would do them no good, because while the Council gathered their fleets, humanity was already moving. On the bridge of the UNS Revenant, a warship unlike any other, Admiral Veers watched the strategic display. The Council's fleet was massive. Hundreds of ships, entire legions mobilized against a single species. Against them, it was the kind of force designed to end a civilization. Veers smiled. They still didn't understand. Humanity had never played by the Council's rules. They hadn't clawed their way to the stars by asking for permission. They didn't build their worlds with caution and bureaucracy. They had earned their place through fire and steel. And now, they would prove it. Juno stood beside him, arms crossed. They're throwing everything at us. Good, Veers said. That means they're scared. Juno smirked. Then let's make sure they stay scared. As the fleet prepared for war, a single message was transmitted across the galaxy. A warning. A promise. You sent killers after us. We sent warriors. You brought war. We will bring extinction, unless you surrender. The Council received the message. They did not surrender. And so, the end began. The stars above Earth burned with fire and death. The Council's fleet had arrived in overwhelming force, a tidal wave of warships stretching across the void, blotting out the light of distant suns. Their intent was clear: wipe humanity from existence, ensure that no trace remained. They had exhausted diplomacy. Fear had left them with only one choice. But humanity had never needed choices. The UN's Revenant cut through the darkness, leading a formation of warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human vessels were not elegant, not sleek or refined like those of the Council's great armadas. They were angular, brutal, built for one purpose alone: to kill. Commander Juno stood at the helm, her gaze fixed on the strategic display. Red indicators swarmed across the screen. Enemy vessels in tight formation, a wall of destruction creeping ever closer. They had come with everything, every last ship they could muster. It would not be enough. Status? She asked, her voice calm. Fleet holding position, Ramirez replied. Weapons primed. Aegis teams deployed to key defensive points across Earth and Mars. We're ready? Juno exhaled slowly. The air in the bridge felt charged, thick with the weight of what was about to happen. The final battle. The Council had underestimated them before. They had assumed humanity would break, that they could be culled like some unruly infestation. Even after the fall of the Vrelkan, they had refused to understand. Now, they would learn. The first volley came without warning. The Council fleet fired in unison, a blinding storm of plasma and kinetic slugs that streaked through space, searing toward Earth's defenses. Shields flared, energy fields shimmering as they absorbed the impact. But the sheer force of the attack sent tremors through every station, every ship. Juno didn't flinch. Returned fire. The Revenant's forward batteries roared to life. Blue lances of particle energy carved through the black, followed by streaks of railgun fire, so fast they became slivers of light against the void. Other human ships followed suit, and in an instant, the battlefield became a maelstrom of destruction. Enemy vessels detonated, consumed in silent bursts of flame and twisted metal. Still, the Council pushed forward, their formation tightening, attempting to overwhelm with sheer numbers. It was a strategy that had worked against lesser enemies. But humanity had never been lesser. Juno's comms flared with a direct link to Admiral Veers. His voice was steady, resolute. Phase 2 is a go. Across the system, dark shapes emerged from the void. Hidden assault teams, Aegis operatives stationed on asteroids and abandoned outposts, waiting for this exact moment. They struck with brutal efficiency, boarding enemy ships, cutting through crews before alarms could even be sounded. The Council had prepared for a fleet engagement. They had not prepared for a war fought in every direction, on every level. A Council dreadnought, once an imposing symbol of their power, broke apart as human saboteurs detonated its core from within. Another vessel, engines disabled, drifted helplessly into the crossfire, torn apart by friendly fire. The tide had turned. On the bridge of the Council's command ship, the Grand Arbiter watched in silent horror. His advisors spoke frantically, voices layered with disbelief. This is impossible. They were supposed to be eradicated. Their forces should have collapsed. They are human, the Arbiter murmured, as if the word itself held the answer. He had spent his life studying war, analyzing tactics across hundreds of species. The Vrelkan had been the perfect killers. Their fleets had been the most advanced. Their forces had been overwhelming. And yet here they were, losing. He turned to his second-in-command, the weight of failure settling into his bones. Order the retreat. But before the words could be transmitted, a voice cut through their comms, hijacking their secure channels. A single voice, calm and measured, yet carrying the undeniable weight of finality. "Commander Juno, there is no retreat," she said. "Only consequences." The Grand Arbiter clenched his fists. The transmission cut off. Outside, the Revenant fired its main cannon, a pulse of concentrated plasma that ripped through the enemy flagship like a blade through flesh. The ship buckled, its structure collapsing, explosions rippling along its spine. The last of the Council's forces shattered. Those who could flee did. Those who remained were obliterated. It was over. In the silence that followed, the battlefield was a graveyard of broken ships, drifting remnants of an empire that had once ruled unchallenged. Juno exhaled, stepping back from the command console. She could feel the eyes of her crew on her, waiting for her words. She only had one. Victory. Across the galaxy, the message spread. The Council had fallen. The war was over. But there would be no celebration. Humanity did not rejoice in conquest. They had not fought for dominion, for control. They had fought to survive. And now they ruled. The surviving members of the Council gathered in what remained of their once grand chamber, their voices hushed, their eyes wary. The seats that had once dictated the fate of countless worlds were now filled with the weight of their own defeat. The doors opened, and silence fell. A single figure entered, Juno, not clad in ceremonial robes, not draped in the symbols of conquest. Just her armor, worn from battle, the black insignia of Aegis stark against the steel. She stepped forward, eyes scanning the gathered leaders. None met her gaze. She spoke. "You sent killers after us." Her voice did not rise, did not waver. It was simple, cold, and absolute. "We sent warriors. No one dared interrupt. You brought war to our worlds," she continued. "You sought to erase us." A pause. A single beat of silence that stretched like an eternity. "We could erase you." Several of the Council leaders stiffened. They knew the truth behind those words. If humanity had wanted, they could have left nothing but ruins. But they hadn't. Juno let the silence linger before speaking again. "We are not conquerors." She stepped forward, leaning just enough to ensure every one of them felt the weight of her presence. "But we are not prey." Her gaze swept the chamber. "Your time is over. You will obey our laws. You will abide by our rules. You will never raise a hand against us again." No one argued. She turned, walking toward the exit. Before stepping through, she glanced back, her final words a quiet, unshakable promise. "Never mistake our mercy for weakness." Then she was gone, and the galaxy belonged to humanity.